Single dad stopped a robbery at 2 a.m. The store owner's true identity changed his life forever. He thought he was saving a quiet old man from a midnight robber, but when that store owner revealed who he really was, the single dad learned he hadn't rescued a stranger, he'd stepped into a secret that would flip his entire life upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan stepped into Harrington Market, the bell above the door chiming softly. The familiar scent of coffee and cleaning supplies greeted him. At this hour, the store was eerily quiet except for the low drone of the refrigeration units along the back wall. Ethan's work boots squeaked against the freshly mopped linoleum as he made his way down the narrow aisle. His muscles ached from hours of scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins at the high school. The night shift paid better, but it meant leaving Mariah alone most evenings. Thank goodness she was responsible beyond her years. He grabbed a gallon of milk from the cooler, checking the expiration date carefully. Money was too tight to waste, even a drop. The cereal aisle beckoned next. He'd get the store-brand cornflakes. Mariah never complained about generic cereals, but it pained him that he couldn't afford the name brands she saw advertised on TV. As he rounded the corner toward the register, Ethan froze. Two men in dark hoodies stood at the counter. One held a gun pointed at the elderly store owner, Dr. Gabriel Harrington, who remained remarkably calm despite the weapon trained on his chest. "Just open the register, old man," the taller robber demanded, his voice tight with nervous energy. "We don't want trouble." "Young men, doctor," Harrington said softly, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh lighting. "I don't believe you want to do this." His weathered hands rested peacefully on the counter. The second robber fidgeted, glancing toward the door. "Hurry up, man. Just grab the money." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He should run. He had Mariah to think about. She couldn't lose another parent. But Dr. Harrington had always been kind to them, often slipping extra groceries into their bag or forgetting to charge for items when times were especially tough. The old man treated everyone who came into his store like family. The milk jug grew slick in Ethan's sweating palms. He set it down silently on a nearby shelf, his mind racing. The robbers hadn't noticed him yet, focused entirely on Dr. Harrington. "I understand times are difficult, Doctor." Harrington continued in that same gentle tone. "Perhaps we could discuss other options." "Shut up." The gunman's hand shook. "Stop talking and give us the money." Ethan spotted a display of canned goods at the end of the aisle. If he could create a distraction, he inched closer, careful to stay hidden behind the shelving. "Violence isn't the answer you're looking for," Dr. Harrington said. Despite the gun pointed at him, his voice carried nothing but compassion. "I see two young men who are lost, not criminals." "You don't know anything about us." The second robber's voice cracked with emotion. "I know more than you might think." Dr. Harrington's eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed to unsettle both men. "I've worked in this community for 40 years. I've watched children grow up, families struggle, people lose their way, and find it again." Ethan had reached the end of the aisle. The canned goods display was within reach. His hands trembled as he carefully grasped the edge of the lowest shelf. The gunman shifted his weight uncertainly. Just open the register." "There's always another path," Dr. Harrington said. "Always a chance to make a different choice." In one swift motion, Ethan yanked the bottom shelf of the display. Cans crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. The robber spun toward the noise, and Ethan launched himself at the gunman's legs. They went down hard. The gun skittered across the floor as they grappled. The second robber stood frozen for a moment before turning to flee. "Doctor?" Harrington vaulted over the counter with surprising agility for his age, cutting off the escape route. Ethan managed to pin the first robber face down, using skills he'd learned in his high school wrestling days. The man struggled briefly before going limp. "It's over," Ethan panted. "Don't make this worse." "Doctor?" Harrington had somehow guided the second robber to a sitting position against the counter. The young man had his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I've already called the police," Dr. Harrington said calmly. "They'll be here shortly." "Ethan, there's some zip ties in the drawer behind the counter, if you wouldn't mind." Ethan blinked in surprise that the old man knew his name. He didn't think Dr. Harrington had even noticed him enter the store. But then, he was starting to realize there was much more to the gentle store owner than met the eye. Minutes later, both would-be robbers were secured. Up close, Ethan could see how young they really were, barely out of their teens. The fight had knocked back their hoods, revealing scared faces and red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," the second robber choked out. "We haven't eaten in days. The shelter was full, and my brother's got a fever." Dr. Harrington knelt beside him. "There's a clinic on Oak Street that won't turn anyone away. And my friend runs the Hope House shelter on 3rd. I'll call ahead, make sure they find room for you both." Ethan stared at the old man in amazement. Even after being held at gunpoint, his first instinct was to help. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Doctor?" Harrington turned to Ethan with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "That was a brave thing you did," he said quietly. "Foolish, perhaps, but brave. You have a daughter to think about. How did you—" "I noticed things, like how you count every penny, buying only what Mariah needs. How you work 2 jobs, but still take time to help her with homework when she stops in after school." He smiled. "This community needs more men like you, Ethan Cole." The sirens were very close now. Red and blue lights began to flash through the store windows. Dr. Harrington placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We'll need to give statements to the police, and then I think we should talk about opportunities." Before Ethan could respond, police officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. As he raised his hands and began to explain what had happened, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change more than just his regular routine of buying milk and cereal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan walked into Harrington Market, the bell above the door announcing his arrival with a gentle chime. His worn work boots squeaked against the freshly mopped floor as he made his way down the narrow aisle, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The store felt unnaturally quiet at this hour, with only the steady hum of refrigerators breaking the silence. Moving toward the dairy section, Ethan caught a glimpse of movement near the front counter. Mr. Harrington, the elderly store owner, stood rigid behind the register. His face was pale, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Something wasn't right. That's when Ethan saw him, a man in a black ski mask, leaning over the counter. The stranger's voice was rough and desperate. "Hurry up with the money, old man, all of it." Ethan's heart jumped into his throat. His first instinct was to run, to get out and call the police. But Mr. Harrington, who had often let him pay later when money was tight, looked so vulnerable standing there alone. The masked robber shifted his weight, and Ethan saw the glint of metal in his shaking hand. A gun. The sight of it made his blood run cold. Time seemed to slow down. Ethan thought of Mariah, sleeping peacefully at home. He thought about how she needed her father, but he couldn't just watch this happen. Without fully processing his decision, Ethan reached for the nearest object, a large can of tomato sauce. His heart pounding, he called out, "Hey!" The robber spun around, his gun hand wavering. In that split second of distraction, Ethan hurled the can. It struck the man's shoulder, throwing him off balance. The gun wavered in his grip. Ethan didn't wait. He charged forward, driving his shoulder into the robber's midsection. They crashed into a display of chips, sending bags flying everywhere. The impact knocked the wind from both of them. The robber's gun clattered to the floor, sliding under a nearby shelf. They grappled on the ground, rolling through the scattered chips. The masked man fought with desperate strength, landing a solid punch to Ethan's jaw that made his vision blur. But Ethan had spent years doing physical labor, and desperation gave him strength. He managed to pin the robber face down, twisting one arm behind his back. The man bucked and thrashed, but Ethan held on. "Someone call the police!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mr. Harrington already on the phone, speaking quickly into the receiver. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Ethan's arms burned from the effort of restraining the struggling man, who had now resorted to cursing and threats. Sweat dripped down Ethan's face, and his jaw throbbed where he'd been hit. Finally, the welcome sound of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the store windows, and within moments, police officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" they shouted. "He's the robber!" Ethan said quickly, slowly releasing his hold and backing away with his hands raised. "The gun's under that shelf." The officers moved swiftly, handcuffing the masked man while others secured the scene. One officer helped Ethan to his feet, asking if he was hurt. "I'm okay," Ethan replied, though his body was starting to feel every bump and bruise from the fight. His hands were shaking now as the adrenaline began to wear off. The next hour passed in a blur of police questions and statements. They recovered the gun, took photos of the scene, and led the handcuffed robber away. Ethan watched through the store window as the police car pulled away, its lights still flashing in the dark. Outside the store, Ethan sat heavily on an empty milk crate, letting the cool night air wash over him. His work shirt was torn, and his muscles screamed in protest at every movement. But he was alive. Everyone was safe. Behind him, the store door opened with a gentle chime. Footsteps approached, slower, uncertain ones. Ethan looked up to see Mr. Harrington standing there, his face still pale, but now filled with an odd mixture of gratitude and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. The old man's hands were clasped together as if holding something precious, and his eyes held an intensity that made Ethan straighten up despite his exhaustion. "Son, Mr. Harrington began, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to change the very air around them. "There's something very important I need to tell you." The night air felt cool against Ethan's face as he sat on the wooden crate outside Harrington Market, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Police cars cast alternating red and blue lights across the parking lot, their colors dancing against the storefront windows. An officer had just finished taking his statement, and now Ethan watched as they led the handcuffed robber to a patrol car. The elderly man from behind the counter approached him, his footsteps slow but purposeful. Up close, Ethan could see the man's weathered face held deep laugh lines around his eyes. Though right now, those eyes showed concern. He wore a cardigan, despite the warm night, and his silver hair was neatly combed. "Young man," the elderly gentleman said, his voice warm and steady despite the night's events, "I cannot thank you enough for what you did in there. You put yourself at risk for a complete stranger." Ethan shook his head, embarrassed by the attention. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." "No," the man said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I'm Gabriel, by the way. Gabriel Harrington." He extended his hand. Ethan stood to shake it properly. "Ethan Cole." "But wait, Harrington. Like the store?" A slight smile crossed Gabriel's face. "Actually, I'm just watching it for a relative tonight. I'm not the owner." "Oh." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. He'd lived in the area for years and had always assumed the elderly man he occasionally saw in the store was Mr. Harrington himself. Gabriel glanced at the police officers still milling about, then back to Ethan. "Would you join me for some tea? I have a small office in the back. It seems we both could use a moment to settle our nerves while the police finish their work." Ethan hesitated. Mariah would be fine for a little longer. She was a sound sleeper, but he wasn't sure about having tea with a stranger at 2 in the morning. Something in Gabriel's eyes, though, spoke of kindness and wisdom that put him at ease. "Sure," Ethan found himself saying. "Tea would be nice." Gabriel led him through a door marked Employees Only and down a short hallway to a small office. Unlike the fluorescent-lit storefront, this room felt warm and lived in. A desk lamp cast a soft glow over worn leather chairs and walls lined with books. Electric kettle sat on a side table, alongside ceramic mugs and a wooden box of tea bags. "Please sit." Gabriel gestured to one of the chairs while he prepared the tea. "Chamomile, okay?" Ethan nodded, sinking into the comfortable chair. His body suddenly felt heavy, the night's events catching up with him. The office smelled of old books and leather, with a hint of something else, perhaps sage or lavender. As Gabriel handed him a steaming mug, Ethan noticed the man's hands were steady, showing no signs of the shock one might expect after nearly being robbed at gunpoint. There was something else about him too, a quiet dignity, a presence that seemed at odds with someone simply minding a relative's store. "Mr. Cole," Gabriel began, settling into the chair across from him. "I feel I owe you more than just thanks. I owe you the truth." He took a careful sip of his tea. "I'm not just a night clerk watching a relative's store. I am Dr. Gabriel Harrington, and I did own this market once, among other things." The title caught Ethan off guard. "Doctor?" "Yes, though not the medical kind." Gabriel set his tea down and opened a drawer in his desk. Am a civil rights lawyer and advocate. Or at least I was until about 8 years ago." He pulled out what looked like an old newspaper clipping and handed it to Ethan. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the photo was clear. A younger Gabriel Harrington stood on the steps of a courthouse, surrounded by a crowd of supporters. The headline read, "Dr. Harrington wins landmark case against housing discrimination." Ethan's eyes widened as he scanned the article. According to the text, Dr. Gabriel Harrington had been a prominent civil rights advocate, winning several major cases and leading peaceful protests throughout the state. He had been particularly known for fighting housing, discrimination, and advocating for educational equality. "But I don't understand," Ethan said, looking up from the paper. "Why did you disappear? And why are you here now?" Gabriel's face grew serious. "The more successful our campaigns became, the more resistance we faced. It started with threats first to me, then to my family. I could handle the danger to myself, but when they targeted my loved ones—" He paused, his eyes distant. "I made the decision to step back, to protect those I cared about. Some called it running away. Maybe it was." Ethan stared at the clipping in his hands, then back at Gabriel. The quiet dignity he'd sensed earlier made perfect sense now. This wasn't just an elderly store clerk, this was someone who had fought battles in courtrooms and on streets. Someone who had made real change in people's lives. "But why tell me this?" Ethan asked. "Because what you did tonight, putting yourself at risk to help others, it reminded me of something I've been missing. Something this community has been missing." Gabriel leaned forward slightly. "You showed courage, not just in tackling that robber, but in the way you did it. You tried to talk him down first. You used force, only as a last resort. That's the kind of judgment we need more of in this world." Ethan felt his face grow warm at the praise. He looked down at the newspaper clipping again, trying to process everything he'd just learned. The man in the photo stood proud and determined, every inch a fighter for justice. The man sitting across from him now seemed quieter, more reserved, but Ethan could see that same strength still present in his eyes. "The article?" Gabriel said softly. "You can keep it. Consider it a thank you for tonight." Ethan carefully folded the clipping and slipped it into his pocket, still somewhat stunned by the revelation. Outside, they could hear the police cars beginning to pull away, their sirens silent now in the early morning darkness. The small back room felt warmer now, its wood-paneled walls lined with old photographs and newspaper clippings that told stories of battles fought long ago. Each frame held memories of marches, protests, and courtroom victories, evidence of a life dedicated to justice. Gabriel settled into a worn leather chair behind his cluttered desk, its surface covered with stacks of papers and a few treasured mementos. His weathered hands folded together as his eyes focused intently on Ethan, studying him with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people deeply. "Cole, you said your name was?" Gabriel's voice carried a hint of recognition, like a melody half remembered. "Ethan Cole?" Ethan nodded slowly, still clutching the yellowed newspaper article about Gabriel's past work. The paper felt fragile between his fingers, as if it might crumble at any moment. "Yes, sir, Cole." Gabriel repeated softly, rolling the name around in his mouth like he was tasting something familiar. His salt and pepper brow furrowed in concentration, and his eyes took on a distant look as he searched through decades of memories. "Were you married to Sarah Cole, Sarah Martinez, before she married you?" The mention of his late wife's name hit Ethan like a physical blow. His heart skipped a beat, then began hammering against his ribs. The familiar ache of loss, dulled by 5 years of grief, suddenly flared to life. "Yes," he managed, his throat suddenly dry and tight. "How did you?" Gabriel leaned forward in his chair, the old leather creaking under his weight. His eyes brightened with realization, like puzzle pieces falling into place after years of waiting. "The Martinez family, I remember them well. 1998, the discrimination case against Valley Ridge Manufacturing." He opened a desk drawer with deliberate care and pulled out an old manila folder, its edges worn soft with time and handling. The folder was thick with documents, photographs, and handwritten notes that spoke of countless hours spent fighting for justice. They were trying to push several Hispanic families out of their jobs through unfair practices. Systematic harassment, impossible quotas, denial of promotions. Your wife's uncle, Miguel Martinez, was one of the lead plaintiffs, a brave man who risked everything to stand up for what was right. Ethan's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. The room seemed to tilt slightly around him as this new information crashed into his understanding of his family's history. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah had never mentioned this connection, though he now remembered her uncle Miguel speaking in hushed tones about some trouble at work years ago, conversations that had always stopped when Ethan entered the room. "They won the case?" "Yes, they did." Gabriel's voice carried deep pride, tinged with the sadness of battles won at great personal cost. His fingers traced the edge of the folder as memories flickered across his features. "It was one of our last major victories before." He gestured toward the newspaper article in Ethan's hand. referring to the threats and violence that had eventually forced him to retreat from public life and hide behind the quiet anonymity of a corner store. Ethan's mind raced through memories of family gatherings, Sarah's relatives speaking in Spanish when they thought he couldn't understand, the way conversations sometimes grew quiet when he approached. Now those puzzle pieces were forming a picture he'd never seen before. Sarah's family, they never told me about your involvement in all this. They just said they'd had help from a lawyer who cared about justice. Many of the families I worked with preferred to keep things quiet, especially after what happened to me. Gabriel's eyes carried the weight of years spent looking over his shoulder, of understanding that doing the right thing sometimes came with a price. The threats weren't just against me, they extended to anyone who might be seen as connected to my work. But your wife's family, they were brave people, Ethan. They stood up not just for themselves, but for other families who were too afraid to speak out. The weight of this unexpected connection pressed against Ethan's chest like a heavy stone. His vision blurred as tears threatened to form, hot and insistent behind his eyes. Sarah had been gone for 5 years now, taken too soon by cancer. But here in this cramped back room, a piece of her family's hidden courage was suddenly coming to light. It felt like receiving a letter from her beyond the grave. I wish. Ethan's voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. I wish I had known while she was still alive. Sarah would have wanted to thank you personally for what you did for her family. Gabriel stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, and walked around the desk. He placed a gentle, fatherly hand on Ethan's shoulder, the same kind of gesture he might have made to his own son if he'd had one. The way you acted tonight, putting yourself at risk to help a complete stranger, that's the exact same spirit I saw in the Martinez family all those years ago. That kind of courage doesn't happen by accident, Ethan. Some things in this life are meant to be. Through the small window, the first hints of pre-dawn light were beginning to soften the harsh darkness outside. The world was slowly awakening, and Ethan found himself thinking of Mariah sleeping peacefully at home, safe in her bed, and unaware of all that had happened during this extraordinary night. I'd like you to come back tomorrow, Gabriel said, his tone carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent years leading others toward justice. There are things we should discuss, important things that can't wait much longer. He pulled out a pen and scribbled an address on a piece of paper, his handwriting still strong despite his age. Not here at the store, though at my home. Say, around 2 in the afternoon? We'll have privacy there and time to talk properly. Ethan looked at the address, then back at Gabriel's weathered but kind face. Despite the bone-deep exhaustion that was beginning to settle into his muscles, something stirred deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was like a door opening in a room he'd thought was sealed forever. I'll be there, he said with quiet conviction. As Ethan drove home through the gradually lightening streets, his mind replayed the events of this incredible night, the robbery that had started it all, the fight that had changed everything, and, most of all, the unexpected connection to his wife's hidden past. The city around him was still mostly asleep, with only a few early commuters beginning their day. He felt physically and emotionally drained, yet somehow lighter than he had in months, as if a burden he hadn't even known he was carrying had suddenly been lifted from his shoulders. His hands were steady on the steering wheel now, no longer shaking from adrenaline and shock. Though uncertainty about tomorrow's meeting tugged at the edges of his thoughts like a persistent worry, he felt something else growing stronger inside him, something he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. It was hope, small but persistent and growing brighter with each passing moment, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the long darkness of night and promising a new day ahead. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Ethan's old sedan pulled into the cramped parking spot outside their apartment building. His muscles ached from the scuffle at the store, but his mind was still racing with thoughts of Gabriel Harrington and their unexpected connection. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs as quietly as possible, wincing at every creak of the worn steps. Their apartment door always stuck a little, and he carefully jimmied the key to avoid making noise. Inside, the small living room was bathed in the soft blue light of dawn, filtering through thin curtains. Ethan set the grocery bag on the kitchen counter and tiptoed down the short hallway. Mariah's door was slightly ajar, just as he'd left it. He peeked in to see her sleeping peacefully, her dark curls spread across the pillow. The sight of her made his heart swell with love and gratitude. After everything that had happened at the store, being here felt like a blessing. Back in the kitchen, Ethan unpacked the milk and other items he'd managed to buy before the robbery. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the pancake mix in the cabinet. Cooking always helped calm his nerves, and Mariah loved waking up to the smell of breakfast. As he stirred the batter, his mind drifted to Gabriel's invitation. The old man had seemed so earnest, so convinced their meeting wasn't just chance. Ethan poured the first circle of batter onto the griddle, watching it bubble and rise. What could Gabriel want to discuss? And why now, after all these years? The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Mariah appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was already dressed for school in jeans and her favorite purple sweater. "Dad, you're making pancakes?" She smiled, but her expression quickly turned concerned. "Why do you look so tired? Did something happen at work?" Ethan flipped the pancake before turning to face his daughter. "Something did happen, but everything's okay now." He kept his voice steady, choosing his words carefully. "There was an incident at Harrington Market when I stopped for milk. A man tried to rob the store." Mariah's eyes widened. "What? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." He moved the finished pancake to a plate and poured more batter. "I helped stop it, and the police came. Nobody got hurt." "You helped stop it?" Mariah came closer, studying his face. "Dad, you could have been, but I wasn't," he interrupted gently. "The store owner, well, the man watching the store, his name is Gabriel. He's actually someone very special. Someone who helped our family a long time ago, before you were born." As they sat down to eat, Ethan shared some of what Gabriel had told him, focusing on the civil rights work and the connection to their family. He left out the threats that had driven Gabriel into hiding, not wanting to worry her. "He invited me to visit him today," Ethan finished, pushing the syrup toward Mariah. I'm sure if I should go." Mariah didn't hesitate. "Of course you should go. Dad, this man helped our family, and now you helped him. It's like everything came full circle." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Plus, you've been working so hard lately. Maybe this happened for a reason." Ethan squeezed back, marveling at his daughter's wisdom. Sometimes it seemed like she was the parent, not him. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from the best." She grinned and stood up, gathering their empty plates. "Now go get some sleep. You look exhausted." Ethan wanted to protest. There were dishes to do, bills to sort through, but Mariah shooed him toward his bedroom. "I've got this, Dad." "Really?" He gave in, knowing she was right. His body felt heavy as he lay down, still in his work clothes. The last thing he heard was Mariah humming softly in the kitchen as she washed the dishes. When Ethan woke, the afternoon sun was streaming through his window. He checked. His phone, 2:15 p.m., Mariah would be in her last class of the day. There was a text from her. "Hope you got some good sleep. Don't forget to visit Mr. Gabriel." After a quick shower and change of clothes, Ethan felt more like himself. He found the address Gabriel had written down for him the night before, tucked safely in his wallet. It wasn't far, just a few blocks from the market. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with modest homes and well-tended gardens. Gabriel's house was small but neat, with a row of bright marigolds along the front walk. The paint was fresh, the windows clean. It looked like any other retiree's home, the perfect place to disappear. Ethan's hand hesitated over the brass knocker. What if this was a mistake? What if Gabriel had only invited him out of obligation? But Mariah's words came back to him. Maybe this happened for a reason. He knocked. Footsteps approached from inside, and then the door swung open. Gabriel stood there in a cardigan and khakis, looking much more at ease than he had in the store. His eyes crinkled with warmth as he smiled, as if he'd been expecting Ethan all along. "Ethan," he said, stepping back and gesturing welcomingly. "Please, come in." Gabriel's living room felt like stepping into a museum of hope and struggle. Black and white photographs covered nearly every wall, each one telling its own story of marches, protests, and moments of triumph. Ethan's eyes were drawn to an image of a younger Gabriel standing shoulder to shoulder with civil rights leaders from decades past. "Please, have a seat," Gabriel said, gesturing to a worn but comfortable armchair. The furniture was simple, practical, much like the man himself. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, thank you," Ethan replied, still taking in the history surrounding him. A photograph of children integrating a school caught his attention. Their brave faces reminded him of his daughter Mariah. Gabriel disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with 2 steaming mugs. His movements were slower than they had been at the store, more deliberate. He settled into his own chair with a slight grimace. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, noticing the discomfort. Gabriel smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. That's actually part of what I wanted to discuss with you, Ethan. He placed his mug on a side table and leaned forward slightly. I have a heart condition. It's been getting worse over the past few years. The words hung heavy in the air. Ethan remembered how the older man had looked tired at the store, even before the robbery. The doctors say I need to take things easier. Gabriel continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. But there's still so much work to be done. He stood up slowly and walked to a drawer, pulling out a thick folder. For the past 15 years, I've been running a small foundation, quietly, behind the scenes. We help families who face discrimination, provide emergency assistance, mediate conflicts. He handed the folder to Ethan. It's not much, but it makes a difference. Ethan opened the folder, finding photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings. Stories of families helped, communities brought together, wrongs made right. His throat tightened as he recognized some of the names. People he knew from around town who'd had mysterious turns of good fortune. Why are you showing me this? Ethan asked, though something in his heart already knew the answer. Gabriel's eyes met his with quiet intensity. Because someone needs to continue this work, Ethan. And after what I saw last night, your courage, your instinct to protect others without thinking of yourself, I believe that someone could be you. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he closed the folder. Dr. Harrington. I'm just a janitor. A single dad trying to make ends meet. I'm not qualified for something like this. That's exactly why you are qualified, Gabriel replied firmly. You understand. Struggle. You know what it means to face injustice and keep your dignity. And most importantly, you have a good heart. Gabriel stood again, this time moving to a large photograph on the wall, a picture of himself as a young man speaking to a crowd. Years ago, I had to step back from public advocacy. The threats became too serious, too dangerous, but I couldn't stop helping entirely. So I found a quieter way. He turned back to Ethan. The foundation has resources, connections, and a network of people who want to help. It needs someone to guide it, someone who understands both strength and compassion. Ethan's mind was spinning. The weight of what Gabriel was suggesting felt enormous. But my daughter, I barely have enough time as it is. The foundation comes with a modest salary, Gabriel said gently. Enough that you wouldn't need 2 jobs anymore. You'd have more time with Mariah, not less. The possibility hit Ethan like a physical force. More time with his daughter? It seemed too good to be true. But the responsibility. This isn't a decision to make lightly, Gabriel acknowledged. I know it's overwhelming, but I don't have much time left to train someone to pass on what I've learned. His voice grew softer. I need to know this work will continue. Ethan stood up, needing to move, to process. He walked to the windows, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The sky was painted in deep oranges and purples, like a canvas of possibility and uncertainty mixed together. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally. You don't need to answer now, Gabriel assured him. Take some time. Think about it. Talk to Mariah. He smiled warmly. Sometimes our greatest opportunities come disguised as impossible choices. Ethan nodded, feeling simultaneously honored and terrified by the trust this man was placing in him. Gabriel walked him to the door, moving more slowly than before. The older man's condition felt more real now, more urgent. Thank you for the tea, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. And for thinking of me this way? Thank you for listening, Gabriel replied. Whatever you decide, you've given an old man hope. The evening air was cool as Ethan walked to his car. The sun was nearly set now, painting the sky in final strokes of color. He sat behind the wheel, keys in hand, mind full of photographs and possibilities and responsibilities and fears. The weight of Gabriel's offer pressed on his heart. Not just a job, but a legacy. Not just help, but purpose. He started the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he sat there as the last light faded, trying to imagine himself stepping into such large shoes, wondering if he had the strength to carry such an important torch forward. The enormity of the decision ahead felt like both a burden and a gift, and he had no idea what to do. Ethan stood in his small kitchen, mechanically chopping vegetables for a simple stir-fry. The quote, steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board couldn't drown out the echo of Gabriel's words from earlier that day. A community foundation, a legacy. His mind kept returning to those civil rights photographs on Gabriel's walls. each one a testament to decades of fighting for justice. "Dad, the rice is going to burn?" Mariah's voice cut through his thoughts. "Oh." Ethan quickly moved the pot off the hot burner. "Thanks, honey." Mariah leaned against the counter, her dark eyes studying him with that perceptive look she'd inherited from her mother. "You've been somewhere else all evening. Just tired," Ethan said, forcing a smile as he dumped the vegetables into the sizzling wok. "Long couple of days. Because of what happened at the store?" Mariah grabbed plates from the cabinet, the familiar clink of dishes filling their small kitchen. "Something like that." Ethan focused on stirring the vegetables, watching steam rise in curls. They ate dinner at their worn kitchen table, the overhead light casting a warm glow over their modest meal. Ethan tried to keep the conversation normal, asking about Mariah's day at school and her upcoming history test. But his thoughts kept drifting to that room full of photographs, to Gabriel's gentle but urgent voice explaining his vision. After dinner, Mariah joined him at the sink without being asked, grabbing a dish towel. The familiar routine of washing and drying dishes usually brought Ethan comfort, but tonight his hands moved mechanically through the sudsy water. "Dad?" Mariah's voice was soft. "What's really bothering you?" Ethan passed her a clean plate, considering his words carefully. "Remember that older man from the store, Dr. Harrington? The one you helped last night?" Mariah dried the plate with careful circles. "He wants to meet with me again tomorrow." Ethan scrubbed at a stubborn spot on a pan. "Says he has something important to discuss." "Is that why you're so quiet? Did something happen today when you visited him?" Ethan looked at his daughter's concerned face and felt a surge of gratitude for her sensitivity. He shared some things about his past work, important work, helping people who needed it. And now he trailed off, not sure how to explain the weight of what Gabriel had proposed. "Whatever it is, Dad, you can handle it." Mariah bumped his shoulder with hers. "You're the strongest person I know." Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't know about that, sweetie." "Well, I do." She hung up the dish towel with a decisive snap. "And I'm usually right about these things." After helping Mariah with some homework problems, Ethan kissed her goodnight and watched her head upstairs. The house felt especially quiet once her bedroom door closed. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat back at the kitchen table, pulling out the newspaper clipping Gabriel had given him. The yellowed paper crackled as he smoothed it flat. The headline read, "Local Attorney Wins Landmark Discrimination Case." Below was a photograph of a younger Gabriel on the courthouse steps, surrounded by a group of grateful faces. Ethan recognized his wife's uncle among them, his arm around Gabriel's shoulders, both men beaming with victory. The article detailed how Gabriel had fought for months to prove systematic discrimination at a local factory, eventually winning back pay and new policies for dozens of affected families, including his wife's family. All those years ago, before Ethan had even met her, Gabriel had been there, fighting for justice. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he set down the clipping. The magnitude of what Gabriel was asking of him felt overwhelming. He was just a janitor, a single dad struggling to make ends meet. How could he possibly carry on the work of someone like Gabriel Harrington? Fear coiled in his stomach as he thought about the threats that had driven Gabriel into hiding years ago. What if taking this on put Mariah at risk? And yet, the memory of Gabriel's considered, quiet dignity, his unwavering belief that their meeting had meaning, tugged at something deep in Ethan's heart. He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street, the same streets where Gabriel had once marched for justice, the same community where families still struggled, where kids like Mariah faced invisible barriers that shouldn't exist anymore. Ethan's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass, tired but determined. He thought of Mariah's words, "You're the strongest person I know." Maybe it wasn't about being strong enough. Maybe it was about being willing to try, to step up when someone asked for help, just like he had in that store, without thinking twice. Running his hand over his face, Ethan made his decision. Tomorrow morning, he would go back to Gabriel's house. He needed answers, needed to understand exactly what Gabriel was proposing. He owed it to himself, to Mariah, and to the memory of his wife's family who had benefited from Gabriel's courage all those years ago, to at least hear him out. He carefully folded the newspaper clipping and tucked it into his wallet. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it with the same determination that had gotten him through every other challenge life had thrown his way. With thoughts of justice, legacy, and possibility swirling in his mind, Ethan headed upstairs to try to get some sleep before another long day ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across Gabriel's front porch as Ethan parked his weathered sedan in the driveway. He'd tossed and turned most of the night, his mind racing with thoughts of Gabriel's unexpected offer. Now, standing at the door with his hand raised to knock, doubt crept in again. Before his knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened. Gabriel stood there in a crisp, button-down shirt and khakis, looking more energetic than yesterday. "Right on time?" Gabriel said warmly. Come in, come in. I've made some coffee." Ethan followed him inside, noticing how different the house looked in morning light. Yesterday's shadows had hidden details he now saw clearly. Certificates of recognition on the walls, shelves filled with legal texts, and carefully arranged photo albums. Gabriel led him to a small study off the living room. A sturdy oak desk dominated the space, its surface covered with neat stacks of manila folders and photo boxes. 2 steaming mugs of coffee waited on a small side table. "Have a seat," Gabriel said, gesturing to a comfortable armchair. He settled into his own chair with careful movements that reminded Ethan of the older man's heart condition. "I wanted to show you exactly what we're talking about here." Gabriel reached for the nearest folder and opened it. "This was the beginning," he said, sliding out a typed document yellowed with age. The original mission statement for the Harmony Foundation, written 30 years ago. Ethan leaned forward, reading the carefully worded paragraphs about community, healing, economic support, and breaking down barriers of prejudice. The language was simple but powerful. "We helped hundreds of families," Gabriel continued, pulling out more papers. "Legal aid, educational support, housing assistance, whatever people needed to get back on their feet with dignity." He passed Ethan a stack of photographs. Children graduating from college, families standing proud in front of new homes, community gatherings where people of all backgrounds shared meals and conversation. Each image told a story of hope. "But it's the letters I want you to see," Gabriel said softly, handling a bundle of envelopes with reverence. "These are why the work mattered." Ethan carefully opened one letter, then another. The handwritten words jumped off the pages. Heartfelt thanks from parents who could now send their kids to college, from families who had escaped cycles of poverty, from people who had found justice when they thought none was possible. "I remember this case," Ethan said suddenly, holding up one letter. "This was Mrs. Henderson from the East Side. She used to watch me sometimes when I was little, before she got her teaching degree." "I never knew you helped her," Gabriel nodded. "She's retired now, but she taught for 25 years, helped hundreds of kids learn to read. That's how change works. One life touches many others." Ethan set down the letters, feeling overwhelmed. "Dr. Harrington," Gabriel, the older man corrected gently. "Gabriel, this is incredible work, but I'm a janitor, a single dad barely making ends meet. I don't have any experience with foundations or nonprofits or—" "You have exactly what's needed," Gabriel interrupted firmly. "Integrity, courage, compassion. The rest can be learned." He pulled out another folder. "Here's the current state of things. Accounts, contacts, procedures. I've kept everything organized, waiting for the right person. I can teach you all of it, step by step, but why me?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan's face. "Because last night, when that young man pulled a gun, your first instinct wasn't to run. It was to protect others, even at risk to yourself. Because you worked 2 jobs without complaint to give your daughter a better life. Because when you look at these photos and letters, I see the same emotion in your eyes that I felt 30 years ago." Ethan stared down at the papers spread across his lap. Each represented a life changed, a family helped, a barrier broken. The scope of it was daunting. "I don't want to let you down," he said finally. Gabriel smiled. "That's exactly why you won't." He pulled out a calendar. "I propose we start small. Come by for 2 hours tomorrow after your day shift. We'll begin with the basics, the foundation structure, our current projects, the people you'll need to know." Ethan took a deep breath. The thought of adding more to his already packed schedule made him tired. But looking at Gabriel's hopeful expression, at the lifetime of work spread out before them, he couldn't say no. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'll try. Just temporarily at first, to see if I can handle it." "That's all I ask," Gabriel replied, satisfaction clear in his voice. He gathered up the papers with careful hands. "Tomorrow, then, 2 o'clock?" Ethan nodded, standing up. His head was spinning with everything he'd learned, everything being asked of him, but underneath the anxiety, there was something else, a tiny spark of excitement, of possibility. "Tomorrow at 2?" he confirmed. "I'll be here." The morning sun cast long shadows across Gabriel's front porch as Ethan parked his weathered sedan along the curb. He'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, his mind racing with thoughts about Gabriel's unexpected proposal. The weight of possibility and responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders as he walked up the path to Gabriel's door. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Gabriel stood there with a warm smile, already dressed in a neat button-down shirt and slacks despite the early hour. "Right on time," he said, stepping aside to let Ethan in. "I've got coffee brewing." Inside, Gabriel's modest living room had been transformed. The coffee table was covered with neat stacks of folders, yellowed newspaper clippings, and photo albums. 2 steaming mugs waited on coasters. "I hope you're ready for a history lesson," Gabriel said, easing himself into his armchair. He picked up a thick manila folder. This is where it all began. For the next several hours, they pored over documents that told a story of hope, courage, and persecution. Gabriel showed Ethan photographs of community meetings from the 1,960 and 70. Faces both black and white gathered around tables, working together despite the tensions of the time. "These were our first donor meetings," Gabriel explained, pointing to a particular photo. "We started small, local business owners who believed in change. But as we grew, so did the resistance." He pulled out a stack of letters, his hands trembling slightly. These came in 1975. The papers were filled with ugly threats, racial slurs, and promises of violence. Some included newspaper photos of Gabriel's house with red X's drawn through them. Ethan's stomach turned as he read them. "Did you go to the police?" Gabriel's laugh was bitter. "Some of these came from the police, son." He shook his head. "But we kept going. We had to. People needed help. Families facing discrimination in housing, children being shut out of better schools, workers fighting unfair practices. They broke for lunch, sharing sandwiches Gabriel had prepared. As they ate, Gabriel showed Ethan financial records, careful accountings of every donation, every dollar spent helping families with rent, medical bills, legal fees, and education costs. The foundation wasn't just about fighting discrimination, Gabriel explained. It was about building bridges, helping people see each other as human beings. When you help someone in need, regardless of their background, it changes both of you. In the afternoon, they reviewed current community contacts. People still quietly helping others, keeping Gabriel's work alive on a smaller scale. Ethan recognized some names: teachers, shop owners, religious leaders, people he passed every day, never knowing they were part of this hidden network of support. The threats never really stopped, Gabriel said softly, showing Ethan more recent letters. But they became less frequent. Still, I had to step back, work more quietly. I couldn't risk the foundation's work being destroyed completely. Ethan sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of what he was seeing. "How did you handle it all? The pressure? The danger?" Gabriel's eyes grew distant. "I remember something my father told me. Fear is natural, but courage is a choice. Every morning I chose courage. Some days, it was harder than others." He leaned forward, fixing Ethan with an intense gaze. "That's why I need someone like you, son. Someone who chooses courage even when they're afraid." The sun was setting when Ethan finally headed home, his mind swimming with everything he'd learned. He found Mariah in the kitchen, homework spread across the table as she worked on algebra problems. "Long day?" she asked, looking up with concern. "You missed your afternoon shift." "I called in," Ethan said, settling into a chair. "Honey, we need to talk about something important." Over plates of reheated lasagna, Ethan explained everything. Gabriel's past, the foundation's work, and the offer to help continue it. He watched his daughter's face carefully, worried about burdening her with this knowledge. But Mariah's eyes lit up with pride. "Dad, this is amazing. Dr. Harrington he's like a real-life hero, and he chose you." She reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You have to do this." "It could be dangerous," Ethan warned. "Things are better now, but there are still people who don't want change." "Mom always said doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy," Mariah replied softly. "She'd want you to do this." Later that night, Ethan stood in his bedroom, laying out his best shirt and slacks for the next day. His hands lingered on the fabric, remembering how Gabriel had shown him photos of community meetings where people dressed their best, a sign of respect for the important work they were doing. As he placed his shoes beside the bed, polished and ready, Ethan thought about Gabriel's words. "Fear is natural, but courage is a choice." Tomorrow would be another full day of learning, of stepping into something much bigger than himself. He turned off the light and climbed into bed, ready to choose courage again when the sun rose. The following afternoon, Ethan's car crawled behind Gabriel's sedan through the older part of town, buildings with faded paint, and weather-worn signs lined the streets, telling silent stories of better days. Gabriel finally turned into a cracked parking lot beside a two-story brick building with boarded windows. "This is it," Gabriel said as he stepped out of his car, using his cane for support. The old Marshall Street Community Center. Ethan parked and joined him, taking in the worn structure. Despite its tired appearance, the building had good bones, solid brick walls, and a strong foundation. Crushed weeds poked through cracks in the concrete steps leading to the entrance. "Doesn't look like much now," Gabriel admitted, fishing out an old keyring. "But 20 years ago, this place was the heart of the neighborhood. Free meals, after-school programs, job training, legal aid clinics, we did it all. The lock was stiff, but the door eventually creaked open. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, streaming through gaps in the boards, covering the windows. The musty smell of disuse filled Ethan's nose as they stepped inside. "Watch your step," Gabriel warned, flicking a light switch. Ancient fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a large, open room. Folded tables leaned against one wall, and stacked chairs lined another. A reception desk sat empty near the entrance. "Miss Rosa used to run the front desk," Gabriel said softly, running his hand along the scratched surface. "She knew everyone's name, their kids' names, their stories. Had a way of making people feel welcome, no matter what brought them here." Before Ethan could respond, voices echoed from outside. Gabriel smiled. Right on time. 3 people entered, a middle-aged woman in nursing scrubs, an older man wearing a mechanic's uniform, and a younger woman in business casual attire. Their faces lit up at the sight of Gabriel. "Dr. Harrington!" the nurse exclaimed, rushing forward to hug him. "It's been too long." "Maria Rodriguez," Gabriel said warmly. "Still at County General?" 25 years now. She beamed. "Thanks to the scholarship program you helped me get." She turned to Ethan with curious eyes. Gabriel made the introductions. "Everyone, this is Ethan Cole. Ethan, meet Maria Rodriguez, James Turner," he gestured to the mechanic, "and Sarah Chen." The younger woman gave a small wave. "These 3 were some of our most dedicated volunteers," Gabriel explained. "And before that, they were people we helped through the foundation." James stepped forward, extending a calloused hand to Ethan. "So, you're the one, Doctor, Harrington's been telling us about." His handshake was firm but friendly. "He says you showed real courage at the store the other night." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Just did what anyone would do." Sarah shook her head. "Not everyone. That's why we're here, because people like Dr. Harrington, and now maybe you, are willing to step up when others won't." They moved through the building, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. Each space prompted stories from the others: the classroom where Maria took her pre-nursing courses, the workshop where James learned auto repair, the office where Sarah got help applying to college. But it wasn't just about the programs, Maria explained as they reached the second floor. "This place gave us hope when we needed it most. Made us feel like we mattered. That's why we were heartbroken when it had to close," James added, his voice heavy. After the threat started, Sarah touched a dusty window frame. "We've always hoped someone would restart the foundation's work, but it's not going to be easy. The people who opposed us before, they're still out there." Ethan noticed Gabriel watching him carefully. "What do you all think about bringing it back?" he asked the group. The 3 exchanged glances. Maria spoke first. "Honestly, we're worried. Not about you," she added quickly. "Dr. Harrington's a good judge of character, but this work, it can be dangerous. People don't like having their comfortable beliefs challenged." "The need is greater than ever, though," Sarah pointed out. "My firm does pro bono work in the community. I see families struggling with the same issues we faced 20 years ago." James nodded. "And some new ones, too. But Maria's right. Whoever takes this on needs to understand what they're getting into." Their concern was genuine, Ethan could tell. But instead of discouraging him, their words stirred something deep inside. These people had faced obstacles he understood all too well. Yet here they were, a nurse, a business professional, a successful mechanic, living proof that change was possible. They spent the next hour sharing more stories and showing Ethan the building's potential. The kitchen could serve meals again. The classrooms could host programs. The workshop space could teach trades. With each possibility discussed, Ethan felt his initial doubts giving way to something stronger: purpose. As the afternoon waned, the others had to leave for work and family obligations. Each gave Ethan their contact information and warm words of encouragement. "We're here if you need us," Maria assured him with a final hug. "Whatever you decide." Gabriel handed Ethan the keys. "Would you mind locking up? I should get home to rest." "Take your time. Sometimes these old walls have wisdom to share." Alone in the building, Ethan walked the rooms one final time. Sunlight slanted through the gaps in the boards, painting stripes across the floor. In the silence, he could almost hear echoes of the lives that had been changed here. The classes taught, the meals shared, the hope restored. He thought of Mariah, of the world she was growing up in. Thought of his late wife, whose family Gabriel had helped years ago. Thought of his own struggles, and how different things might have been with a place like this to turn to. Standing in the entrance, keys in hand, Ethan took one last look inside. The building wasn't just empty rooms and dusty memories. It was possibility. It was potential. It was a chance to make a difference, just as Gabriel had done for so many others. As dust settled outside, Ethan locked the heavy door, each turn of the key feeling more like commitment than closure. The morning sun streamed through Gabriel's living room windows, casting long shadows across stacks of papers spread over his coffee table. Ethan sat on the worn leather couch, a notepad balanced on his knee, while Gabriel settled into his favorite armchair with a cup of steaming tea. "A community gathering is exactly what we need," Gabriel said, his eyes bright with purpose. "Show people we're not just whispering about change, we're ready to act." Ethan nodded, though his stomach tightened at the thought of public speaking. Where would we hold it? The park on Oak Street would be perfect. Open space, plenty of parking, and it's central for everyone. Gabriel reached for a folder. "We'll need a stage, chairs, sound system, and speakers." Ethan added, jotting notes. "Who did you have in mind?" Gabriel smiled. "Well, I'll open with the foundation's history, of course. Then you'll need to speak." "Me?" Ethan's pen froze mid-word. "I don't know about that, Gabriel. I'm not good with crowds. You're the future of this foundation, Ethan. People need to see your heart, hear your voice." Gabriel leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "Just speak from your experience. That's all anyone needs to hear." They spent the next hour outlining activities, food vendors, local musicians, children's games. Ethan suggested setting up information booths about the foundation's different programs. His hand cramped from writing everything down. "We should reach out to the church groups first," Gabriel said, counting on his fingers. "Then the neighborhood associations, schools." Ethan's phone buzzed. His supervisor from the high school was calling. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. "Hey, Mike. Yeah, I know I'm scheduled tonight." "No, I understand." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "I'll be there." When he returned, Gabriel noticed his changed expression. "Everything all right? Just work stuff." Ethan sank back onto the couch. "They need me for an extra shift tonight. Budget cuts mean they're short-staffed." Gabriel set down his tea. "This foundation work, it's putting strain on you, isn't it?" "I'll manage." Ethan tried to smile. "Been juggling things for years now." "Ethan," Gabriel's voice was firm, "you can't pour from an empty cup. We need to discuss compensation." "No." Ethan held up his hand. "That's not why I'm doing this. I know it's not. But you have responsibilities, a daughter to support." Gabriel pulled out another folder. "The foundation has resources." "Let's focus on the gathering," Ethan interrupted, turning back to his notes. "We need to set a date." They worked through lunch, mapping out a timeline and creating task lists. By mid-afternoon, Ethan had filled several pages with plans and contacts. His head swam with details, but there was also excitement building beneath his exhaustion. This could really make a difference in people's lives. That evening, Ethan's kitchen was quiet, except for the gentle clink of dishes as Mariah washed up after dinner. He sat at the table, reviewing the day's notes. "Dad," Mariah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You've barely touched your food." "Sorry, sweetheart, just trying to figure some things out." He pushed his plate aside. "We need to talk." Mariah dried her hands and sat across from him. "Is it about the foundation?" "Partly." Ethan met her eyes. "I might need to cut back some hours at work. Maybe give up the evening shift at the school." "Good." Her quick response surprised him. "Good? Dad, you're working yourself to death." Mariah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I see how tired you are all the time. This foundation thing, it lights you up. I haven't seen you this excited about anything in forever. But money will be tighter, he warned. We might have to be extra careful for a while. We're good at careful, she smiled. Remember last winter when the heating bill was so high? We made it work. We always do. Ethan's throat tightened. When did you get so wise? Must be those expensive schools you work so hard to send me to. She stood and kissed his cheek. I'm gonna finish my homework. Don't stay up too late. After she left, Ethan spread the papers across the table again. Budget sheets from both jobs, foundation documents, planning notes for the gathering. The numbers blurred before his eyes as exhaustion crept in. He'd been up since 5 that morning. Just 5 minutes, he thought, resting his head on his arms. Just need to rest my eyes for 5 minutes. His breathing deepened, papers scattered beneath his cheek, as sleep finally claimed him at the kitchen table. The morning sun streamed through Gabriel's living room windows, casting long golden rectangles across the worn hardwood floors as they finished outlining their plans. Dust particles danced in the warm beams of light, creating an almost magical atmosphere in the quiet space. Ethan glanced at his watch, 9:45 a.m. The digital numbers seemed to pulse with urgency. In just 48 hours, they would hold their first community gathering. The weight of that deadline pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. We need to move fast, Gabriel said, his weathered hands carefully arranging a stack of contact cards on his coffee table. The cards were yellowed with age, some edges frayed from years of handling. These are business owners who supported us in the past. Some might remember me. His voice carried a mixture of hope and uncertainty, the tone of a man revisiting ghosts from a different life. Ethan picked up the cards, his calloused hands slightly trembling as he felt the texture of each worn piece of paper. Names and addresses filled his vision. Martinez, Family Grocery, Thompson's Hardware, Chen's Laundromat. These weren't just businesses, they were the heartbeat of neighborhoods he'd walked through his entire life. Places where he'd shopped with pocket change and humble dreams. I'll visit as many as I can between my shifts, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The exhaustion from his double life was already setting in, but determination burned brighter than fatigue. Take these two. Gabriel handed him a thick folder of testimonials, the manila paper soft from handling. Show them what we've accomplished before. It helps people believe in what's possible. Gabriel's eyes held the wisdom of someone who understood that hope needed proof to take root in skeptical hearts. After leaving Gabriel's house, Ethan drove his aging pickup truck straight to his first stop, Martinez Family Grocery. The familiar bell above the door chimed as he entered, its cheerful sound cutting through his nervous energy. The small store smelled of fresh bread and cleaning supplies, with narrow aisles packed floor to ceiling with everyday necessities. Mrs. Martinez, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, stood behind the register, counting quarters into neat stacks. She looked up as Ethan approached, her expression curious but welcoming. He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of Gabriel's legacy on his shoulders. Mrs. Martinez? My name is Ethan Cole. I'm here about the Community Unity Foundation. Her weathered hands paused mid-count as he explained the foundation's mission, his words coming faster as his passion took over. When he mentioned Gabriel's name, her eyes lit up like candles being lit in a dark room. Dr. Harrington? He helped my sister's family years ago when they lost their home in that fire. She smiled warmly, the memory softening her features. That man has a heart as big as the sky. Of course we'll support you. Leave some flyers here. I'll make sure. Everyone who comes in sees them. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan visited 6 more businesses, each stop a small lesson in human nature. At Thompson's Hardware, the elderly owner listened politely but seemed hesitant, his fingers drumming nervously on the counter. At Chen's Laundromat, Mrs. Chen immediately offered to display flyers and asked how she could volunteer. The responses varied like notes in a complex melody, some harmonious, others discordant, but all part of the same song. By evening, the soles of his work boots ached from pavement pounding, and he had to rush to his custodial shift at the high school. The familiar routine of unlocking doors and turning on fluorescent lights felt different somehow, as if he was seeing his second job through new eyes. As he mopped the empty hallways that night, the rhythmic sound of the mop against linoleum created a steady beat that matched his thoughts. His mind kept returning to Gabriel's words from earlier. The hardest part isn't facing others, Ethan. It's facing our own doubts. Each stroke of the mop seemed to sweep away a little more of the uncertainty that had lived in his chest for so long. The next morning, Ethan sat at a copy shop downtown, watching hundreds of bright yellow flyers roll off the industrial printer. The machine hummed and clicked with mechanical precision, each sheet emerging warm to the touch. Each one announced in bold letters, "Community Unity Foundation, join us for a new beginning." The words looked different in print than they had on Gabriel's handwritten notes, more official, more real, more permanent. During his lunch break, he called names from Gabriel's old contact list, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed each number. Many business owners remembered the foundation's previous work with crystal clarity. Their voices would soften when he mentioned Gabriel's name, and more than once, he heard the catch of tears in their responses. Mrs. Patterson, from the daycare center, actually cried when she heard about the foundation's revival, whispering, "We've been waiting for this for so long." That afternoon, Gabriel and Ethan met again in Gabriel's kitchen, a cozy space with checkered linens and the lingering scent of coffee. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table, sharing simple ham sandwiches while reviewing their progress. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, creating intricate patterns on the table's surface. "You look tired," Gabriel observed, his perceptive eyes studying Ethan's face as he slid a glass of cool water toward him. The gesture was gentle, fatherly. "Just trying to keep up with everything." Ethan rubbed his eyes with the heels of his palms, feeling the grit of exhaustion behind his eyelids. "My shift supervisor wasn't happy about me switching hours around. He made some comments about reliability." Gabriel leaned forward, his expression growing serious, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. "You know, when I first started this work decades ago, I faced more than just threats from angry neighbors. People questioned my qualifications, my motives. Some said I didn't belong in those circles, that I should stick to my own kind." His voice carried the weight of old wounds that had healed but left scars. Ethan nodded slowly, his chest tightening as he remembered his own experiences with discrimination. The job interviews that went nowhere, the subtle looks, the feeling of doors closing before he even knocked. "How did you handle it?" "By remembering that healing happens in community," Gabriel replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "When we help others heal from their pain and struggles, we heal ourselves too. Every person we touch becomes part of our own healing journey." They spent the next hour planning the event layout with the care of architects designing a cathedral. Every detail mattered: where to place the welcome table, how to arrange chairs to encourage, conversation, which corner would be best for the children's activity area that Mariah had suggested. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Mariah. "How's it going, Dad? You missed dinner, but I saved you a plate." He smiled, the first genuine smile of the long day, typing back, "Busy but good. Thank you, sweetheart. Love you." That evening, Ethan walked through downtown as the shops began closing for the day, taping flyers to bulletin boards with methodical precision. Each store that had agreed to help had a stack displayed prominently near their registers or in their front windows. The sight of those bright yellow papers scattered throughout the neighborhood filled him with an unfamiliar feeling, pride mixed with purpose, hope seasoned with determination. The following day passed in a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Between his morning shift at the warehouse, where he loaded trucks with mechanical efficiency while his mind planned foundation logistics, and afternoon foundation work that took him to 3 more neighborhoods, Ethan barely had time to breathe. His lunch consisted of a gas station sandwich eaten while driving between appointments, but something fundamental had changed inside him. The exhaustion felt different now, more like the satisfied tiredness of an athlete after a good workout than the soul-crushing burden he'd carried for years. Gabriel noticed the transformation during their evening meeting at his kitchen table. "You're standing taller?" he said with a knowing smile, his eyes twinkling with pride and recognition. "Am I?" Ethan hadn't realized it himself, but as he thought about it, he could feel the difference in his shoulders, the way his spine held itself straighter. When we find our true purpose, it changes how we carry ourselves in the world, Gabriel explained, his hands clasped together on the table. "I've watched you these past 2 days. You're not just completing tasks on a list, you're beginning to believe in something bigger than yourself." As the sun began to set on the second day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan held his last flyer in his hands. The paper felt significant, weighted with possibility. The community bulletin board outside the library seemed like the perfect spot, a place where people came seeking knowledge and connection. As he pressed the pushpin through the paper into the corkboard, he paused to read the words again, seeing them as if for the first time. The yellow flyer moved slightly in the evening breeze, rustling against the other announcements for yard sales and lost pets. Ethan stepped back, his fingers lingering on the corner of the paper as he absorbed what he'd accomplished. In just 48 hours, he had watched this idea transform from Gabriel's handwritten plans on paper into something real and tangible, something that might actually make a difference in people's lives. Streetlights flickered on around him as dust settled over the quiet town like a comfortable blanket. People were heading home from work, tired but hopeful for the weekend ahead. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground. Life continued its eternal rhythm, but now Ethan felt like he was part of the melody instead of just listening from the outside. Tomorrow would bring whatever challenges and opportunities awaited them. But for now, standing beneath the growing canopy of stars, Ethan felt a calm certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. This was his path, his purpose, his chance to honor Gabriel's legacy while building something new. The last pushpin secured the flyer firmly in place with a small but satisfying click. In the gathering darkness, the yellow paper seemed to glow with its own inner light, a beacon of possibility calling out to anyone who might pass by and wonder if change was really possible in their corner of the world. The old community center buzzed with energy that Saturday morning. Ethan stood near the entrance watching in, amazement as more and more people filed through the doors. The parking lot had filled up 30 minutes before the scheduled start time. "I can't believe how many showed up," Ethan whispered to Gabriel, who stood beside him, greeting guests with warm handshakes. "The community remembers," Gabriel replied softly. "They've been waiting for something like this." Mariah helped direct people to chairs they'd borrowed from local churches. The main room, despite its worn carpet and faded walls, felt alive with conversation and hopeful energy. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the old "Unity is Strength" banner they'd hung across the back wall. Ethan recognized faces from his visits over the past days. Mrs. Martinez sat in the third row, the hardware store owner stood near the water cooler, and several volunteers from Gabriel's past work clustered together near the front. But many faces were new, drawn by word of mouth or the bright yellow flyers that had popped up across town. "There must be over 100 people here," Mariah said, returning to Ethan's side. She squeezed his hand. "Dad, they're all here because they believe in what you and Dr. Harrington are doing." The clock struck 10, and Gabriel gestured toward the simple podium they'd set up. Ethan's stomach tightened. They'd planned for Gabriel to speak first, then introduce the foundation's plans. But Gabriel had other ideas. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I think you should start us off." "Me?" Ethan's throat went dry. "But we didn't plan." "Sometimes the best words come straight from the heart." Gabriel smiled. "These people need to hear your voice." Ethan looked at his daughter, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the podium. The room gradually quieted. Faces turned toward him, expectant, curious, hopeful. His prepared notes sat in his pocket, but suddenly they felt unnecessary. "Good morning," he began, his voice shaky but growing stronger. "My name is Ethan Cole. A week ago, I was just a dad working 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet. I thought that was all I'd ever be." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some nodded in understanding. "Then one night, I walked into a store at 2 in the morning to buy milk." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. "That night changed everything. I met Dr. Gabriel Harrington, though I didn't know who he was at first." Ethan gestured toward Gabriel, who stood quietly at the side of the room. Many heads turned, and whispers of recognition spread. "Dr. Harrington told me about this foundation, about the work he did years ago. He showed me letters from families who'd been helped, photos of communities coming together. But more than that, he showed me something I'd lost sight of: hope." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. In the audience, he saw Mrs. Martinez dab at her eyes with a tissue. "I've lived in this town my whole life. I've faced discrimination, struggled to provide for my daughter, felt alone in my battles. But standing here today, looking at all of you, I realize none of us has to fight alone." The room had grown completely still, every face focused on him. This foundation isn't just about helping people with immediate needs, though we'll do that too. It's about healing old wounds, building bridges between communities, and creating the kind of town where every child can grow up feeling valued and supported. Ethan found Mariah's face in the crowd, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "I'm not a wealthy man. I'm not highly educated. Until recently, I didn't think I had anything valuable to offer. But Dr. Harrington taught me that every one of us has the power to make a difference. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us first. Spontaneous applause broke out. Several people stood, including Mrs. Martinez and the hardware store owner. Ethan felt tears threatening, but kept going. Today isn't just about reviving a foundation. It's about reviving our belief in what's possible when we stand together. I may not have much, but I promise you this. I'll give everything I have to make this work. Because every person in this room deserves to feel the hope I'm feeling right now. The applause grew louder. More people rose to their feet. Ethan saw tears on many faces, matching the emotion he felt in his own heart. Gabriel walked to the podium, placing a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. The room quieted again. Friends, Gabriel's strong voice carried across the space. 30 years ago, I started this foundation because I believed in the power of community to heal itself. Today, I stand before you to announce its revival under new leadership. He turned to face Ethan directly. In Ethan Cole, I see the same passion for justice, the same commitment to service that drove me all those years ago. But I also see something more, a deep understanding of the struggles our community faces because he has lived them himself. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Therefore, it gives me great joy to officially announce that Ethan Cole will be taking the reins of the Community Unity Foundation, leading it into a new era of service and hope. The room erupted in applause again. Ethan felt overwhelmed by the surge of emotion, pride, gratitude, and for the first time in years, real hope for the future. Mariah ran up to hug him, and several people from the audience approached to shake his hand. Gabriel raised his hands for silence, stepping forward to speak again. There is one more thing I'd like to... Suddenly, Gabriel's face contorted. His hand flew to his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt. The warm smile disappeared, replaced by a grimace of pain. Ethan watched helplessly as Gabriel crumpled forward at the podium, his weathered hands clutching his chest. The microphone screeched as it hit the floor, and gasps rippled through the crowd. Without thinking, Ethan rushed to Gabriel's side, catching him before he fell completely. Someone called 911. Ethan's voice cracked with panic. He lowered Gabriel gently to the floor, the old man's face twisted in pain. Can't breathe. Gabriel wheezed, his usually steady hands trembling. Mariah appeared beside them, her phone already pressed to her ear. The ambulance is coming, Dad. They said 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like hours. Ethan held Gabriel's hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest become more labored. The crowd had backed away, forming a concerned circle around them. Some prayed quietly, others whispered among themselves. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension. The paramedics burst through the doors with practiced efficiency, their equipment rattling as they rushed to Gabriel's side. Ethan moved back, letting them work, but couldn't take his eyes off Gabriel's ashen face. "Sir, are you family?" one of the paramedics asked as they lifted Gabriel onto the stretcher. "No, but I'm all he has right now," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Then you can ride with us." Ethan turned to Mariah. "Honey, can you get a ride home with Mrs. Thompson?" Mariah nodded, her eyes wet with tears. "Call me as soon as you know anything." The ambulance ride was a blur of beeping monitors and urgent voices. Gabriel lay still, an oxygen mask covering his face, while the paramedics worked around him. Ethan sat in the corner, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles turned white. At the hospital, they whisked Gabriel away through double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," leaving Ethan standing alone in the sterile corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair. Hours crawled by. Ethan's phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned community members asking about Gabriel. He responded when he could, but his attention kept drifting to the doors where Gabriel had disappeared. Finally, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan jumped to his Adamus how? Feet? "Yes? How is he?" "We've stabilized, Dr. Harrington, but I need to be honest with you." The doctor's face was grave. His heart condition has significantly worsened. The stress of today's events triggered a severe episode. Ethan's stomach dropped. "But he'll recover?" "For now, yes, but his heart is failing faster than we'd like. He needs complete rest and minimal stress." The doctor paused. "Has he discussed his condition with you?" Ethan shook his head numbly. He's been managing chronic heart failure for some time. Today's episode indicates it's progressing more rapidly than expected. While waiting to see Gabriel, Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a concerned community member. The message made his blood run cold. You should have left well enough alone. The Foundation died years ago for a reason. Watch your back. More messages followed, each more threatening than the last. Some mentioned knowing where he lived, others referenced Mariah by name. Ethan's hands shook as he scrolled through them, recognizing the same hate that had driven Gabriel into hiding years ago. When he finally got to see Gabriel, the old man looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, nothing like the commanding presence from earlier that day. Various machines beeped steadily around him. Ethan. Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry about today. Don't apologize, Ethan said, taking the chair beside the bed. Just focus on getting better. The Foundation can wait. Ethan interrupted firmly, though his mind raced with thoughts of the threatening messages. Gabriel's eyes, though tired, remained sharp. Something's wrong. I can see it in your face. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed Gabriel the messages. The old man's face darkened as he read them. The Sons of Liberty, Gabriel said quietly. They're still around. I should have warned you they might resurface. They know where I live, Gabriel. They mentioned Mariah. Ethan's voice cracked. I can't put her at risk. I understand, Gabriel replied softly, closing his eyes. More than anyone, I understand. Visiting hours ended too soon. Ethan drove home in a daze, his mind replaying the threats over and over. The street seemed different now, darker, more threatening. Every car behind him made him nervous. Was someone following him? When he got home, Mariah was waiting up despite the late hour. She threw her arms around him as soon as he walked in. How's Dr. Harrington? She asked. Ethan hugged her tight, thinking of the threats. He's stable. The doctors are taking good care of him. That's good, Mariah said, pulling back to look at his face. Dad, what's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart. The lie felt bitter in his mouth. Just tired. It's been a long day. Later, lying in bed, Ethan stared at the ceiling. The phone on his nightstand remained silent, but the threatening messages seemed to echo in his head. He thought about Gabriel in the hospital, about the Foundation's important work, about the community's hopes. Then he thought about Mariah sleeping in the next room, innocent and trusting. The image of her getting hurt because of his choices made his chest tight with fear. Was he being selfish, trying to do this noble work? Or was he being a coward, considering giving up? Sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house made him tense. Every passing car made him wonder if someone was watching. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Maybe it would be better to walk away now, before things got worse. Go back to his regular jobs, keep his head down, stay safe. Forget about changing the world and focus on protecting his daughter. The digital clock on his nightstand clicked over to 3 a.m. Ethan lay there in the darkness, torn between duty and fear, courage and caution, while the night stretched endlessly ahead. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee as Ethan walked toward Gabriel's room early the next morning. Dark circles hung under his eyes from a night spent tossing and turning, checking his phone for more threatening messages and worrying about Mariah sleeping in the next room. A nurse nodded to him as he approached room 412. Through the doorway, he could see Gabriel propped up in bed, looking smaller and more fragile against the white sheets. Various machines beeped steadily around him. You look worse than I do, Gabriel said with a weak smile as Ethan entered. Ethan pulled up a chair beside the bed. Rough night, he admitted, running a hand through his uncombed hair. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, but I'll survive this round. Gabriel studied Ethan's face carefully. Something's troubling you beyond my health, isn't it? Ethan's shoulders slumped. He pulled out his phone and showed Gabriel some of the messages he'd received. They're saying they'll make me regret getting involved, that I should think about my daughter's safety. His voice cracked. I can't put Mariah at risk. I'm sorry, but I think I need to step away from the Foundation. Gabriel's expression grew serious. Those are the same tactics they used against me years ago. Empty threats meant to inspire fear. He reached for Ethan's hand. You're stronger than you realize, son. I'm not, Ethan whispered, tears welling up. I'm just a janitor, a single dad barely making ends meet. I'm not cut out for this kind of fight. The dam broke and his shoulders shook as he finally released the fear and doubt he'd been holding back. I'm not worthy of your legacy. Look at me, Gabriel said firmly. When Ethan raised his wet eyes, Gabriel continued. Do you know what I saw that night in the store? I saw a man who, despite his exhaustion and his own problems, didn't hesitate to put himself in danger to help a stranger. That's exactly the kind of person this work needs. Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But what if something happens to Mariah? We'll take precautions, set up security systems, work with local law enforcement. Gabriel squeezed Ethan's hand. But don't let fear steal your purpose. The world needs more people willing to stand up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. A nurse appeared in the doorway to check Gabriel's vitals, and Ethan stood to leave. I need some time to think, he said quietly. Take the time you need, Gabriel replied. But remember, you're not alone in this fight. Leaving the hospital, Ethan drove aimlessly through town until he found himself parking outside St. Mary's Church. He hadn't been inside since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. The old brick building stood quiet and dignified, its stained glass windows gleaming in the midday sun. The heavy wooden doors creaked as he entered. Cool air and silence wrapped around him like a blanket. The sanctuary was empty except for an elderly woman praying near the front. Ethan slid into a pew near the back, the familiar smell of wood polish and old hymnals bringing back memories of Sunday mornings with Sarah. Sunlight filtered through the colored glass, painting patterns on the floor. Ethan closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, tried to pray. The words came haltingly at first. I don't know if I'm doing this right anymore, he whispered. I'm scared. I want to do what's right, but... He thought of Mariah, of Gabriel lying in the hospital bed, of all the people at the community event whose eyes had held such hope. I need help. I need strength. I need to know what to do. Time seemed to slow in the quiet sanctuary. Ethan remembered how Sarah used to say that sometimes prayer wasn't about getting answers, but about finding peace in the questions. As his breathing steadied, he felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. He thought about what Gabriel had said about not letting fear steal his purpose, about standing up for what was right. Maybe that's what faith was. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to keep going despite it. When Ethan finally opened his eyes, the sanctuary was bathed in late afternoon light. He stood slowly, his knees cracking after sitting so long. The elderly woman was gone, and he was alone in the church. Walking to the doors, he paused with his hand on the handle. He didn't have all the answers yet, but the crushing weight of decision felt lighter somehow. The panic that had gripped him through the sleepless night had eased into something calmer, more centered. Ethan stepped outside into the warm sunlight. Questions still swirled in his mind about what to do next, but the desperate urge to run away had faded. He stood on the church steps, feeling the gentle breeze on his face, knowing that whatever choice he made would come from a place of clarity rather than fear. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows as Ethan walked the now familiar path to Gabriel's room. His footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor, matching the steady rhythm of his heart. After his breakdown in the church yesterday, he felt different. Not exactly confident, but somehow more grounded. Room 412 looked the same as before, but Gabriel appeared noticeably weaker. The older man's skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and dark circles rimmed his eyes. Still, when he spotted Ethan, Gabriel's face lit up with that familiar warm smile. "There you are," Gabriel said, his voice thin but clear. "I was hoping you'd come back today." Ethan settled into the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like every one of my 78 years, Gabriel chuckled softly, then winced. "But my mind is clear, and that's what matters right now." He shifted slightly, adjusting himself against the pillows. "There's something important I need to tell you." Ethan leaned forward, concerned by the urgency in Gabriel's tone. "What is it?" "That night in the store, it wasn't the first time I'd seen you in look. Action." Gabriel's eyes held a knowing look. "I've been watching you for months, Ethan, long before that robbery." Confusion crossed Ethan's face. "Watching me? I don't understand. Do you remember last December, a cold Tuesday evening at the bus stop on Mason Street?" Gabriel asked. Ethan's brow furrowed as he tried to recall. "The veteran," he said slowly. "The older man in the wheelchair?" Gabriel nodded. "James Peterson. He was one of my cases. I was helping him navigate the VA system, trying to get his benefits sorted out." He paused, catching his breath. "That evening, I was across the street when I saw you talking to him." The memory came flooding back to Ethan. He had been waiting for the bus after work, his last $20 in his pocket for groceries. The veteran had been trying to collect enough money for a night at the shelter. "You gave him your last $20, Gabriel continued. "I know it was your last because I overheard you tell him that, but you gave it. Anyway, Then you walked 3 miles home in the cold because you couldn't afford the bus fare anymore. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. How did you know I walked home? Because I followed you in my car, Gabriel admitted. I wanted to see what kind of man would give away his last dollar to help a stranger. His eyes grew misty. That's when I knew you were the one I'd been looking for. You've been planning this since then? Ethan asked, stunned. I've been searching for years for someone to carry on my work, Gabriel explained. Someone with not just the courage to face opposition, but the heart to truly care about people. He reached for a manila envelope on his bedside table, his hands trembling slightly. That's why I had these prepared months ago. Ethan took the sealed packet, feeling its weight. What is this? Legal documents. Everything you need to take full control of the Foundation's assets and operations. Gabriel's voice grew stronger, more insistent. The paperwork is already filed with my lawyers. All it needs is your signature to activate it. Ethan stared at the envelope in his hands, overwhelmed by its implications. Gabriel, No, Gabriel interrupted gently. Don't tell me you're not ready or not worthy. I've spent my whole life reading people. Ethan, that night with James showed me your true character. The robbery just confirmed what I already knew. Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes. But the threats are exactly why we need people like you, Gabriel finished. People who understand that doing what's right isn't always easy or safe. He reached out and gripped Ethan's arm with surprising strength. Promise me you won't abandon this mission. Promise me you'll see it through. Ethan looked into Gabriel's eyes, seeing decades of wisdom, struggle, and hope reflected there. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but instead of feeling crushed, he felt strangely lifted by it. I promise, Ethan said softly. Then with more conviction, I promise. Gabriel relaxed back against his pillows, satisfaction spreading across his tired features. Good, he whispered. Good. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. 2 nurses entered, pushing a cart of medical equipment. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, one of them said kindly. We need to run some tests now. Ethan stood, carefully tucking the envelope into his jacket. He gave Gabriel's hand one final squeeze. I'll come back tomorrow. Gabriel nodded, already being attended to by the nurses. Ethan walked to the door, pausing for a moment to look back at the man who had changed his life so dramatically in just a few days. Then he stepped into the hallway, the envelope heavy against his chest, carrying the weight of a promise he knew he would keep. The late afternoon sun was setting as Ethan pulled into his driveway, his mind heavy with everything Gabriel had shared. The sealed manila envelope sat on the passenger seat, containing what Gabriel called the future. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he gathered his things and headed inside. The smell of mac and cheese greeted him, Mariah's go-to comfort food when she sensed something was weighing on her dad. She stood at the stove, stirring the pot with careful attention. Hey, Dad, she said softly, studying his face. How's Mr. Gabriel doing? Ethan set his keys down and sank into a kitchen chair. Not great, sweetheart. We need to talk. Mariah turned off the stove and brought 2 bowls to the table. Steam rose from the creamy pasta as she sat down across from him. Tell me everything. Ethan took a deep breath and started from the beginning. How Gabriel had been watching him for months, even before the robbery. How he'd seen Ethan give away his last $20 that day at the veterans' shelter. The legal documents making Ethan the Foundation's new leader. He knew all along, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. He was testing me, I guess, making sure I was the right person. Mariah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You are the right person, Dad. Anyone can see that. They moved to the living room couch, leaving their half-eaten dinner behind. The sky outside had darkened to deep purple, and Ethan switched on the small lamp beside them. I'm scared, Mariah, he admitted. This is bigger than anything I've ever done. And with those threats coming in, he trailed off, not wanting to worry her more. Mom would be so proud of you, Mariah said quietly. Remember what she always used to say? Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared. Ethan felt tears prick at his eyes. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers, she smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder, both of them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything. Ethan thought about purpose, how sometimes it finds you when you least expect it, like a 2 a.m. robbery that changes everything. You know what this means, right? Mariah said finally. We might have to cut back on some things. Maybe I could get a part-time job to help out? No way, Ethan said firmly. Your job is school and being a teenager. I'll figure out the rest. But that's just it, Dad. Mariah sat up straight, her eyes serious. You don't have to figure it out alone anymore. That's what Mr. Gabriel was trying to tell you. Sometimes being responsible means letting other people help carry the load. The wisdom in her words struck him deeply. She was right. Gabriel hadn't just chosen him, he'd chosen them. A family to carry on his work. The harsh ring of Ethan's phone cut through the moment. His heart sank when he saw the hospital's number on the screen. Mr. Cole? The nurse's voice was gentle. I'm calling about Dr. Harrington. He passed away peacefully about 20 minutes ago. He had a smile on his face, and his last words were about how the work would continue. Ethan couldn't speak for a moment. Mariah watched his face and knew. She wrapped her arms around him as tears began to fall. Thank you, he managed to say before hanging up. Father and daughter held each other, grieving for the remarkable man who had changed their lives in just a few short weeks. The manila envelope sat on the coffee table before them, no longer just papers, but a sacred trust. Through his tears, Ethan reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was Gabriel's legacy, and now, somehow, his own. Mariah's hand covered his, as together they held the weight of tomorrow. They sat there in the soft lamplight, mourning yet feeling the first stirrings of purpose taking root. Gabriel had given them more than just a foundation to run. He'd given them a chance to make a difference, to stand up for what was right, to help heal their community. The documents felt warm in Ethan's hands, as if they held not just words and legal forms, but the very spirit of the man who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. In that moment, though his heart was heavy with loss, Ethan felt the strange peace that comes with knowing exactly where you're meant to be. The sun hadn't yet risen when Ethan's eyes opened, his mind already racing despite only a few hours of fitful sleep. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan slowly turning above him. Gabriel's passing left an emptiness in his chest, but something else stirred there too, a sense of purpose that felt both terrifying and right. He got up quietly and made his way to the kitchen, careful not to wake Mariah. The manila envelope from Gabriel sat on the kitchen table where he'd left it the night before. Ethan made a pot of coffee and settled into a chair, spreading the documents across the worn wooden surface. The foundation's paperwork was meticulous: contact lists, meeting minutes, financial records, and detailed plans for community programs. Gabriel had prepared everything Ethan would need. At the bottom of On Says, the stack was a handwritten note. Ethan, fear will always try to stop good work. But remember, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. The community needs you now. Ethan took a deep breath and reached for his phone. It was barely 6 a.m., but he started dialing numbers from Gabriel's volunteer list. Many answered despite the early hour. News of Gabriel's passing had spread quickly through their tight-knit community. We're meeting at the community center at noon, Ethan told each person. Gabriel wouldn't want us to stop now. We need to show those trying to scare us that we're not backing down. By the time Mariah emerged from her room, Ethan had filled 3 pages of his notebook with plans and ideas. She found him surrounded by papers, his coffee long cold. Dad, she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Did you sleep at all? Ethan looked up, managing a tired smile. Some? Listen, honey, I know we're both hurting about Dr. Harrington. But I've been thinking all night. He trusted me with something important, and I can't let him down. Mariah pulled up a chair beside him. What can I do to help? You don't have to, Dad, she interrupted firmly. I want to, Doctor. Harrington believed in you, and I do too. Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. He pushed a list toward her. We need supplies for tomorrow. I'm planning a public forum, bringing everyone together to talk openly about what's happening. Show people we won't be intimidated. Mariah studied the list. I'll handle it. You focus on the bigger stuff. Throughout the morning, Ethan's phone buzzed constantly with messages from volunteers and community members. Some expressed concern about the threatening messages, but most offered support. By 11:30, he was pulling into the community center's parking lot, where several people already waited. Inside, they cleared away dust and arranged chairs in the main room. Ethan stood at the front, Gabriel's notes in his hands, and addressed the small group. I know many of you are worried, he began, his voice stronger than he expected. Those threats we received, they're trying to use fear to stop what Dr. Harrington started. But that's exactly why we can't quit. He shared his plans for the public forum, watching faces shift from uncertainty to determination. They broke into teams, each taking on different responsibilities. Some would handle security, others would reach out to local media, and another group would contact community leaders for support. Around 2 p.m., Mariah arrived with boxes of supplies, notebooks, markers, name tags, and snacks for tomorrow's event. She'd also printed flyers announcing the forum, designed with a simple but powerful message: standing together, a community conversation for change. Ethan watched her organizing materials with other volunteers, her face set with the same determination he'd seen in Gabriel's eyes so many times. Pride swelled in his chest, mixing with the grief that still felt raw and fresh. As afternoon faded into evening, Ethan sat in Gabriel's old office at the back of the building. He'd been making calls for hours, his voice growing hoarse. The local newspaper had agreed to cover the forum. The police promised extra patrols around the center. Even the mayor's office had called to offer support. He looked at the last item on his to-do list: draft opening remarks for tomorrow. The blank page stared back at him. How could he find the right words to honor Gabriel's legacy while moving people to action? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the longest-serving volunteers. "Ethan," she said gently, "we're ready to go through the security plans for tomorrow." He nodded and followed her to the main room. The space had been transformed. Chairs arranged in a circle, signs posted, and a small memorial table set up with Gabriel's photo and a candle. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Dr. Harrington always said that real change happens when people look each other in the eye and really listen, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, gesturing to the circular arrangement. "We thought he'd like this setup." Ethan squeezed her shoulder in thanks, unable to speak for a moment. They walked through the security measures. Volunteers would monitor all entrances, the police would maintain a visible but non-intrusive presence outside, and everyone entering would need to sign in. By early evening, most volunteers had headed home. Mariah sat cross-legged on the floor, stuffing folders with agenda sheets and feedback forms. Ethan settled at a table nearby, finally returning to his draft of opening remarks. "Dad," Mariah said after a while, "read what you have so far." Ethan looked down at his notes. 2 days ago, we lost a great man, but Dr. Gabriel Harrington left us something precious, a vision of what our community could be. He believed that change starts with honest conversation, with the courage to face hard truths together. That's why we're here. He paused, looking up at his daughter. "Is it okay?" Mariah smiled, her eyes shining. "It's perfect." Just like Dr. Harrington would say, simple, honest, and from the heart. They worked in comfortable silence as darkness fell outside. Ethan finished his remarks, reviewed the forum schedule one final time, and helped Mariah pack up the last of the supplies. Standing in the doorway, he took a last look around the prepared space. "Ready for tomorrow?" Mariah asked, slipping her hand into his. Ethan thought of Gabriel's note about courage and fear. "As ready as I'll ever be," he answered, switching off the lights and locking up for the night. The community center's main hall buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Ethan stood near the podium, his hands slightly trembling as he watched familiar and unfamiliar faces take their seats. The crowd was larger than he expected. At least 100 people filled the metal folding chairs. Mariah squeezed his arm. "You've got this, Dad," she whispered, then went to sit in the front row. Several police officers stood discreetly by the doors, a precaution Ethan had requested after the threatening messages. But as he scanned the room, he didn't see anger or tension. Instead, he saw curiosity, hope, and even some tear-streaked faces still mourning Gabriel's passing. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached the podium. The murmuring crowd fell silent. He cleared his throat and looked down at his prepared notes, then pushed them aside. Gabriel wouldn't have wanted a scripted speech. "I want to start by saying something unexpected," Ethan began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "To those who've sent messages threatening this foundation and what it stands for, I forgive you." A collective gasp rippled through the room. In the back, Ethan noticed a small group of men shifting uncomfortably. The ones he suspected were behind the threats. "Dr. Gabriel Harrington taught me that hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. And he lived that truth every single day of his life." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "Many of you didn't know the real Gabriel. He never wanted recognition. But today, I want to share his story." For the next 15 minutes, Ethan told them about Gabriel's decades of quiet service, helping families avoid foreclosure, paying medical bills for children, mediating racial conflicts, and bringing divided communities together. He described Gabriel's choice to step back from public life, not out of fear, but to work more effectively in the shadows. Gabriel believed every person has worth, Ethan continued, even those who threatened him, even those who hated him. He knew their anger came from fear and pain, and he wanted to heal that too. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman in the third row, stood up slowly. "May I speak?" she asked, wiping her eyes. Ethan nodded, stepping aside from the podium. 10 years ago, my grandson was in trouble with drugs, she said, her voice shaking. We had no money for treatment. Doctor? Harrington didn't just pay for rehab. He visited Tommy every week, brought him books, helped him apply to college. She turned to face the crowd. My grandson is now a substance abuse counselor, helping other young people. Her story broke the dam. One by one, people rose to share their experiences with Gabriel. A black business owner described how Gabriel helped him secure a loan when banks wouldn't. A white former police officer admitted how Gabriel's guidance helped him confront his own prejudices. A young mother told how Gabriel had secretly paid her rent for 3 months after her husband died. Each story painted a picture of a man who had touched countless lives without seeking credit. Ethan noticed the group of men in the back growing less tense, some even nodding as they listened. This foundation isn't about politics or division, Ethan said when he returned to the podium. It's about continuing Gabriel's real work, bringing people together, helping neighbors in crisis, and healing old wounds. We don't need to agree on everything to help each other. We just need to see each other's humanity, like Gabriel did. He pulled out the sealed packet of documents Gabriel had given him. Dr. Harrington trusted me with this foundation's future, but it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. Every person in this room has something to contribute. Every person has value. Every person can help write the next chapter of this story. Ethan looked directly at the group in the back. And everyone is welcome at this table, even those who disagree with us. Especially those who disagree with us, because that's what Gabriel would want. The silence in the room was profound. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First a few, then dozens, until the entire room was on their feet. The applause started softly but grew into a thunderous wave. Through tear-blurred eyes, Ethan saw even the men in the back standing, their faces softened with something that looked like respect. Mariah ran up and hugged him tight as the applause continued. Over her shoulder, Ethan could have sworn he felt Gabriel's presence, nodding in approval. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning after the public forum, Ethan arrived at the community center just as the sun peeked over the horizon. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since yesterday's event. He balanced a cardboard tray of coffee cups in one hand while fumbling with the keys in the other. Inside, he flipped on the lights and settled at the old desk Gabriel once used. His inbox overflowed with emails from people wanting to help, local business owners, retired teachers, young activists, all inspired by yesterday's message of unity and hope. "Dad," Mariah burst through the door, her backpack stuffed with art supplies. "I sketched some ideas for the foundation's new logo last night." She pulled out a notebook and spread several drawings across his desk. Each design incorporated elements of bridges and joined hands. "These are beautiful, sweetheart." Ethan smiled, touched by her enthusiasm. "What about this one?" He pointed to a simple yet powerful design showing diverse hands forming a circle. "That's my favorite too," she beamed. The morning flew by as they answered calls and organized meetings. By lunch, 3 local restaurants had pledged monthly food donations for foundation events. The hardware store offered supplies for building repairs, and a printing company volunteered to handle all their promotional materials. "Mr. Cole?" A woman in a crisp business suit appeared in the doorway. "I'm Sarah Martinez from First City Bank. We'd like to discuss setting up proper accounts for the foundation." The afternoon became a blur of meetings with financial advisors and legal experts. They helped Ethan navigate the paperwork to officially register the foundation as a nonprofit organization. A retired judge offered pro bono legal counsel, ensuring everything was properly documented. That evening, Ethan ordered pizza for the small group of volunteers who had gathered to help sort through years of old files. They worked until midnight, organizing records and updating contact lists. The next morning started even earlier. Ethan met with potential board members, community leaders Gabriel had trusted, along with new faces bringing fresh perspectives. They sat around a scratched conference table, sharing ideas and building plans. "We need to honor Gabriel's vision while addressing today's challenges," said Robert Chin, a local business owner. Others nodded in agreement. Mariah spent her after-school hours designing flyers and social media graphics. She worked alongside college students who volunteered their time to build the foundation's website. The room hummed with creative energy as they collaborated. More donations arrived throughout the day: office supplies, furniture, and even a new computer system from a tech company. Each gift came with stories about how Gabriel had touched lives, either directly or through his quiet influence in the community. Local media caught wind of the foundation's revival. A reporter from the town newspaper interviewed Ethan about their plans. He spoke from his heart about Gabriel's legacy and their mission to build bridges between different communities. As evening approached on the second day, Ethan reviewed the foundation's updated mission statement with the newly formed board. The words reflected both Gabriel's original vision and their renewed commitment to unity and positive change. "I think Gabriel would be proud," said Margaret Wilson, an elderly board member who had known him for decades. Her eyes glistened with tears as she signed the document. Near midnight, Ethan stood in the community center's main hall. Mariah had gone home hours ago, but he needed a moment to take it all in. Papers covered every surface: architectural plans for renovations, program proposals, volunteer schedules, and partnership agreements. Each represented a thread of hope, weaving together to form something bigger than himself. He walked through the quiet rooms, turning off lights. The past 48 hours felt like a lifetime, yet somehow also like the blink of an eye. In just 2 days, Gabriel's dream had sprung back to life, stronger than ever. At the front door, Ethan paused. Through the window, streetlights cast a warm glow on the building's worn sign. Soon it would be replaced with a new one, bearing their updated name and Mariah's logo design. But tonight, the old letters seemed to shine with special meaning. He inserted the key into the lock, listening to the familiar click. The sound echoed in the empty hall, not with finality, but with promise. For the first time since Gabriel's passing, Ethan felt complete certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The metal door closed behind him with a solid thunk. In his chest, his heart felt full, not with the crushing weight of responsibility he'd carried before, but with the lightness of purpose fulfilled. The morning after the public forum, Ethan arrived at the community center early, his heart heavy yet purposeful. He carried a framed photo of Gabriel, one that showed the civil rights leader in his prime years, standing proud before a crowd with that gentle, determined smile. Carefully, he placed it on an easel at the front of the main hall. Volunteers bustled around him, hanging more photos from Gabriel's life along the walls. Each image told a story: Gabriel marching for justice, Gabriel helping families, Gabriel standing up against hatred. Some were faded with age, their corners soft and worn, but the power of those moments remained unchanged. "Dad, where should we put these flowers?" Mariah called from the entrance, struggling with an armful of white lilies. Several local florists had donated arrangements, filling the old building with a sweet, solemn fragrance. "Over by the memorial table," Ethan directed, his voice catching slightly. The memorial table was a simple wooden desk draped in white cloth, where people could leave cards and mementos for Gabriel's memory. As the morning progressed, people began trickling in. First came the older volunteers who had known Gabriel for decades, then families he had helped, community leaders, and even some former opponents who had come to respect his unwavering dedication to peace. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman Gabriel had helped save her house from foreclosure years ago, approached the memorial table with trembling hands. She placed a worn photograph showing Gabriel standing with her family on their front porch, all smiles on the day they'd saved their home. "He never wanted recognition," she said softly to Ethan, "but he deserves to be remembered." Ethan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The crowd continued to grow, filling the chairs they'd set up and spilling into standing room along the walls. The murmur of shared memories filled the air, stories of kindness, courage, and quiet determination. At precisely 10 a.m., Ethan stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting warm patches across the gathered faces. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his chest. Dr. Gabriel Harrington touched countless lives in our community, though many never knew his name. He preferred to work quietly, helping one family at a time, one problem at a time, one heart at a time. People nodded in agreement. Some wiped away tears. I only knew Gabriel for a short time, Ethan continued. But in those few days, he showed me what real courage looks like. It's not about grand gestures or loud speeches. It's about showing up, day after day, to help others, even when you're tired or afraid. A man in the back raised his hand. Ethan recognized him as Mr. Jenkins, a local teacher. May I share something? Ethan gestured for him to speak. 20 years ago, Mr. Jenkins said, standing, I was a troubled kid headed down the wrong path. Doctor, Harrington caught me vandalizing this very building. Instead of calling the police, he handed me a paintbrush and asked me to help him fix it. That simple act of trust changed my life. More hands went up, more stories poured out. A woman told how Gabriel had quietly paid for her son's medical bills. Another spoke about how he'd mediated a dangerous neighborhood conflict that could have turned violent. Each story revealed another facet of Gabriel's quiet influence on the community. When the stories finally settled, Ethan moved to a covered object mounted on the wall. With careful hands, he pulled away the cloth to reveal a bronze plaque. The metal caught the sunlight, throwing warm reflections across the room. The plaque read, In memory of Dr. Gabriel Harrington, a man who taught us that love is stronger than fear. His legacy lives on through acts of kindness. Ethan faced the crowd again, his voice growing stronger. This plaque is just a symbol. The real memorial to Gabriel will be in our actions. This foundation is being reborn today, not just in his memory, but as a living continuation of his work. He gestured to the walls around them, where Gabriel's photos hung like silent witnesses. These pictures show us where we've been, but Gabriel's last wish wasn't about preserving the past. It was about building the future. He believed in this community. He believed in the power of ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. Mariah appeared at his side, holding a candle. She lit it and passed it to the person nearest her, who lit another. Slowly, flame by flame, light spread through the room until every person held a small, steady glow. Gabriel taught me that change doesn't happen all at once, Ethan said, looking out at the sea of candle-lit faces. It happens one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one day at a time. That's how we'll honor him, by continuing his work, by believing in the power of compassion over hatred, by never giving up on each other. The room stood in reverent silence, candlelight flickering against the walls where Gabriel's images watched over them. Ethan looked at each face in turn, the young, the old, people of every background united in this moment of remembrance and commitment. To Gabriel, he said simply, raising his candle, to Gabriel. The room echoed back, hundreds of flames lifting in unison. Standing before them, Ethan felt the weight of the moment, the sacred trust he'd inherited, and the strength of a community ready to carry Gabriel's legacy forward. In the gentle light of those candles, he saw what Gabriel had seen all along. The power of people coming together with open hearts and willing hands, ready to build something beautiful out of love and hope. A week after the memorial service, Ethan's world had shifted into a different rhythm. The foundation office hummed with activity during the day, filled with volunteers coordinating outreach programs and planning community events. The threatening messages had stopped completely, replaced by a steady stream of supportive emails and phone calls from people wanting to help. Ethan sat at his desk one evening, reviewing the day's work. The foundation's new logo, designed by Mariah, hung proudly on the wall, a simple image of open hands forming a bridge. She'd captured exactly what Gabriel's legacy meant. Looking at it made Ethan smile. His daughter was flourishing too. She'd started a youth volunteer program at her high school, inspired by the foundation's mission. Just yesterday, she'd bounced into the kitchen, excited about plans to organize a multicultural food festival to raise money for local families in need. The community had transformed as well. People who'd never spoken to each other before now worked side by side at foundation events. The old divisions that had once seemed so permanent were slowly dissolving, replaced by genuine connection and understanding. Even some former critics had come around, offering their support and resources. That night, around midnight, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind kept drifting back to that fateful night at Harrington Market, the moment that had changed everything. He got out of bed, pulled on his jacket, and left a note for Mariah in case she woke up. Couldn't sleep, gone for a short drive, back soon. Love you. The streets were quiet as he drove through town. Streetlights cast pools of gentle light on the empty sidewalks. He passed the community center, now vibrant with fresh paint and new signs, announcing upcoming events. A banner hung across the entrance, "Together We Rise, Gabriel Harrington Foundation." When he pulled into the Harrington Market parking lot, the familiar glow of the store's lights welcomed him. It looked exactly the same as it had that night, the slightly flickering 24-hour sign, the faded advertisements in the windows, the old shopping cart with the wobbly wheel near the entrance. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. A young clerk looked up from his phone, offering a sleepy, "Good evening." Ethan nodded and walked to the candle display. He chose a simple white one, remembering how Gabriel had always preferred simplicity over flash. At the counter, the clerk rang up his purchase. Ethan glanced at the spot where he'd tackled the robber that night. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet he could still feel the surge of adrenaline, the split-second decision that had led him here. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small brass plaque he'd had made earlier that week. It wasn't fancy, just a simple rectangle with engraved letters catching the fluorescent light. "The night a stranger changed my destiny. Mind if I put this here?" Ethan asked the clerk, gesturing to the counter. The young man looked at the plaque, then at Ethan. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're Mr. Cole, right? From the foundation?" "My mom volunteers there," he smiled. "Dr. Harrington used to come in here all the time. Really nice man. The best," Ethan agreed softly. The clerk helped him find the perfect spot, a small shelf near the counter where the plaque would be visible but protected. Ethan placed the white candle next to it, lit it carefully, and stepped back. The small flame danced, casting warm light on the brass words. Ethan stood there for a long moment, remembering everything. Gabriel's quiet strength, his unwavering faith in people, his ability to see the best in everyone. He thought about the foundation, about Mariah's proud smile when she saw him speaking at community events, about the countless lives they were touching, continuing Gabriel's work in ways that would have made him proud. Through the store's front windows, Ethan could see the sky beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching, painting the horizon in gentle shades of hope. It was time to head home. He had a full day ahead, meetings with local business owners, a youth mentoring session, and plans to review for the foundation's expanding programs. As he walked toward the door, the clerk called out, "Mr. Cole?" Ethan turned. "Thanks for what you're doing with the foundation. It's making a real difference." Ethan smiled, touched by the simple sincerity in the young man's voice. "Thank you. But the real thanks goes to Gabriel. He showed us all what was possible." The bell chimed again as Ethan stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with promise. As he walked to his car, the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, washing the world in gentle gold. The light caught the store's windows, reflecting back like a beacon of hope. Just as Gabriel had been, just as the foundation would continue to be. Ethan paused at his car door, taking in the peaceful moment. Inside Harrington Market, the small candle flickered beside the plaque. A quiet testament to how one chance encounter, one act of courage, one person's belief in another, could change everything. The foundation would carry on, touching lives, building bridges, creating the kind of world Gabriel had always dreamed of. One person, one moment, one choice at a time. The rising sun painted everything in shades of possibility, and Ethan felt ready. Ready to carry the light forward, ready to honor Gabriel's legacy, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.